Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, Grinding Gear Games put up a post on their website that listed a number of statistics about the Harvest League. There have been 4 lots of these stats that have come out. This is the 4th and final one, and it's talking about unique items, popular maps, and the most deadly areas. A couple of interesting things in here. The first thing I wanted to point out from this is having a look at the Harvest trade-enabled softcore league. So the one that most players play, with neither the hard mode of your character dies, it's deleted, nor the hard mode of your character is prohibited from trading with other players active. And it's interesting to have a look at the popularity of various items. Tabula Rasa is the most popular unique item, counting low-level and high-level characters alike. It should surprise no one. Tabula is really strong on for anyone that's leveling a second character. It's common enough that some people get it while they're leveling through the axe, and there are a considerable number of players that will join the league, play for a little while, and then maybe they decide Path of Exile is not for them. Maybe they decide that they're just not feeling their current character or not feeling the Harvest League or whatever, and they don't play through to high levels. So for that reason, not really surprised to see Tabula at the top there. It's the combination of accessibility and power that puts it there. What really did surprise me, though, is Thread of Hope. Thread of Hope is an extremely powerful unique jewel that drops from Sirus the Awakener only, and that was the thing that made me quite surprised to see it here. So Thread of Hope is the unique jewel that lets you basically skip around on your passive tree. It has a drawback on it, and that drawback is a random variable between -10 and -20 to all of your resists. Divine Orb will change that number, but it also has a second random variable, which also gets changed by a Divine Orb, which is either that it allows you to allocate passives that are within a small ring, a medium ring, a large ring, or a very large ring. And this lets you sort of bounce around on the passive tree if you can find the right type of Thread of Hope for your character. It's an incredibly powerful jewel that lets you get more notable passives and keystone passives on your build than you otherwise could, and that's why it's so good. I'm not surprised to see it being very popular on high-level characters, but I think it says something about just how many people are beating Sirus regularly, that it is the second most equipped item across all levels, because this is not a trivial item to loot yourself. It's basically one of those items that you need to beat, not necessarily the hardest boss in the game, but one of the harder bosses, and the current sort of end boss of the overarching storyline of the game. So for that reason, really interested to see this be such a high entry here. I would have expected it to be, not even on the top 10 for all levels, and then to be very popular on 90+ characters. Watcher's Eye is very similar. Next up, Watcher's Eye is an Uber Elder and Elder specific drop. So a lot of these do drop because the drop rates aren't very low. Likewise, for Thread of Hope, drop rate's not particularly low either. But they can be very, very, very expensive for a Watcher's Eye with desirable mods. And a Watcher's Eye without desirable mods tends not to be all that popular a jewel to use. So again, it's a tribute to the fact that the players are getting much further in the game, and a lot more people are beating the high-end bosses than I think is commonly thought of in the Path of Exile community. The average player is better than you think, and many of those so-called average players are beating Sirus. They're beating Elder. Maybe they're even beating Uber Elder or Awakening level 8 Sirus as well. Batsory's Promise, all-purpose powerful flask, are only equipable on higher level characters, so the first 3 items can be equipped at any level, whereas Batsory's Promise requires you to be, I think, level 67 to use it. But again, lots and lots of players do reach that level, and more of them do than equip a Wanderlust, for instance. Wanderlust being a really common and fairly powerful set of leveling boots. Next up at 70+, you see that all of the leveling specific items, with the exception of Tabula Rasa, are gone. And then you start seeing things like, Cinder Swallow Urn pops up. This is a very powerful flask. Actually, there's just a lot of powerful flasks here. Flasks are incredibly powerful in this game. If you're not using lots of unique flasks, then you probably should. And then the only build-specific items that come up are these Primordial Jewels. They're used by Golem-based characters, but the reason that they come up here is because Golem characters use a lot of them. These are not an item that you can only use one of. If someone is using Primordial Harmony, they're probably using about 4 of them, and also using about 4 Primordial Eminences on top of that. They're really, really, really good on their niche. When we get to 90 plus, flasks everywhere. There's one Timeless Jewel makes its way in. Now, I think that Glorious Vanity should be probably being used on more characters than this. Glorious Vanity is the Vaal Timeless Jewel. It is actually, I think, the most common of the Timeless Jewels. If it's not, it's pretty close to that. But basically, every life-based character probably should be using a Glorious Vanity. It does one of 3 things for you. It either gives you Immortal Ambition, which is an incredibly powerful way of gaining a mod. It used to be on a unique item only. I think Soul Tether Unique Belt. That what it does is that it sets your energy shield maximum to 0, but it allows you, when you're at full life, to leech energy shield over and above your life. You can only leech it up to whatever your energy shield maximum is, but this just means that while you are fighting, you are getting an enormous amount of effectively bonus life while you are actively leeching. It's incredibly powerful and something that you've got to really try this out at some point if you've never tried it out. Any attack-based build should definitely try a Glorious Vanity of Ahuna. Then you've got Doriani with Corrupted Soul, which gives you a considerable amount of energy shield and also has an interesting extra mechanic in that 50% of non-chaos damage that you suffer bypasses your energy shield. Partly that is there to prevent it from being broken in conjunction with things like Chaos Inoculation. But also it's genuinely beneficial if you can end up with your life total and your energy shield total after all this bonus ES that you get being fairly similar to each other. What this means is that if you take a big hit, let's say you've got 4,000 life and 3,500 energy shield after Corrupted Soul, and you probably have higher numbers than that. But if you've got 4,000 and then 3,500, and then you take a hit for 5,000, you drop down to 1,500 life and 1,000 ES. You can then drink a life flask, maybe a couple of them, and get back to 4,000 life and 1,000 ES pretty quickly. And that's a very, very powerful defensive layer in that it lets your life flasks give you some indirect way of not necessarily replenishing your ES. It's not replenishing it, but of working in conjunction with your energy shield in a better way. So very, very powerful. Glorious Vanity in general, really good. And then Divine Flesh is even better on builds that are mostly life with next to no ES or none at all. Divine Flesh is absolutely incredible. So yeah, that's Glorious Vanity. This is genuinely an underrated item at the moment. It should be much higher than number 10 on this list. Next up, we have the various other alternative harder leagues. So leagues that have got harder rule sets. So first up, we have Hardcore, where if your character dies, it is removed from the league. And it's interesting here to see how popular the helmet from Sirus is. So Sirus drops Crown of the Inward Eye something like 40% of the time when you kill him. It's a lot. And it's just generally speaking a really good all-around helmet, both providing very solid defenses and also some extra damage. So yeah, this is well worth playing around with if you've never used it before. Additionally, we have Thread of Hope again, very popular again, despite the fact that it is also a Sirus-gated unique, and I think it's a bit rarer than Crown of the Inward Eye as well. So it goes to show that even in the hardcore rule set, it's not that everyone's farmed their own Thread of Hope, but enough players are confidently beating the Sirus fight deathless that these are entering the trade league economy in considerable numbers. Next up, we have Solo Southbound, And again, Thread of Hope is the most used unique on high level characters. It's not very available on lower tier on lower level characters. So, level 70 to 90 characters don't use it very much, but it is still very, very popular and very, very strong. Other than that, because the solo Southbound rule set is somewhat of a it has a big impact on what you can It makes rarity have a bigger impact on what's available to characters. So you'll see that a fairly rare item like Rumi's Concoction can still come up on level 90 plus characters, but it's too rare for many people to have it on lower level characters. Actually, yeah, there's a number of them going around. There is a divination card though that can give you either Rumi's Concoction or Lion's Roar, and that isn't hard to farm. So maybe that's coming in at some point. So that's the solo Southbound softcore, and then when you go with both hard modes established, so you're both banning yourself from trading and from dying, the situation changes again. Interestingly though, Glorious Vanity, despite the fact that it's harder to get, it's still very, very, very popular. Anyway, that's all I want to say on the unique items. It's always an interesting thing to have a look at and see how it evolves over leveling. I do think it'd be really interesting to see what the 80 to 90 bracket looks like as well, but unfortunately we don't have that information. Next up was the top 10 maps that are being run, and this is fascinating. We start out with some of the lower tier ones: Glacier, Tropical Island. Then we have Promenade. Now Promenade is a tier 16 only in the Harvest League. So what we're seeing here is some evidence that the number of maps being run at very high level is actually much, much, much higher than I think a lot of players would expect. The reason for that is that there's this long-term habit amongst most Path of Exile community members to underestimate the average player. This statistic, I think, proves that somewhat wrong. There are a very large number of people running a lot of promenades. Now, some of these obviously are, absolute extreme power gamers running fractured fossil copies or max investment promenades. But also, I reckon a lot of these are more casual players that are getting to endgame and then find that of the tier 16 maps, they just like Promenade the most, that it's an easy layout, or maybe they've seen a guide online that suggests it. Even though I don't really like the map that much, I can see why people do. It's a straightforward layout. It is excellent in conjunction with the Delirium Mirror when that spawns, and it has a very, very easy and forgiving boss, but it also has a moderate number of monsters total. The reason I don't like it is that there's a large gap between packs in it. Then we have the other tier 1 maps. We have Strand, the most basic of all the maps. And then we have Burial Chambers, another high tier map only. So Burial Chambers is interesting to see here because it's very popular because people are aware that it can drop the Doctor Divination card, and the Doctor Divination card is a lot of currency if it drops there. We then have Shore, which is another really straightforward layout. Toxic Sewer, which is another really popular high-level layout. And then we have Chateau, which really surprises me, despite the fact that I made a divination card for a tier 16 one a while ago, back in the days when high-tier maps were a bit rarer than they are now. I'm not sure why Chateau is there. There must be some reason for it, and if you've got some sort of idea, it doesn't have any premium divination cards. It does drop a couple of divination cards, but they're not particularly sought after or valuable in any numbers. So I'm at a bit of a loss as to why it's so popular there. I would have expected to see one of the other sort of reasonably good layouts, like Canyon, for instance. I would have thought would have been more popular than Chateau. They're both, from memory, they're both the same tier. But anyway, Chateau it is. Then we have a look at where players are dying. And this was the most interesting part of this information. So first up, the Azurite Mine. What happens with the Azurite Mine is that there's ways to sort of break it. The deeper that you go in the Delve Mines, the more monster hit points scale up, and so does the monster damage. Monster damage actually scales up faster than monster hit points, which is really surprising. And it means that by the time you get to about depth 1700, most builds that are built really, really defensively still can't survive a critical hit from the wrong monster. So if you've got, say for instance, a super tanky Juggernaut build, or a super tanky Hierophant or Guardian, they'll be able to survive getting hit by the trash monsters, just the white monsters, the magic monsters, but then there'll be a rare that will have the wrong combination of mods. Maybe it'll have the powerful crit Zora, powerful crit Zaphix. Maybe it'll have allies deal additional physical damage. One of these mods. And then when that monster hits you, no matter what your defenses are, somewhere around 1700, it will kill you with a critical hit. Then somewhere around 2200, it's not just the biggest, toughest monsters that are killing you on a crit. It's pretty much everything kills you on a crit, and the toughest monsters kill you on a hit, no matter how defensively you've built your character. And so somewhere between 1500 depth and 2200 depth, most players change their strategy from building defensively to just going all out offense. And this is what the deepest delvers look like. I've filtered this list to show only characters that have solo delved at 2500 or deeper. And if you have a look down here, you'll see that no one has high energy shield or life, and most people have chaos inoculation with a trivial energy shield pool. The reason that they're doing that is that the amount of damage that you take from darkness in the delve is directly proportional to the sum of your life and your energy shield, and so you take a lot less damage if your energy shield is low. And these players accept that if they get hit by anything if they're a life build, or by any non-chaos damage if they're an ES build, that it will one-shot them, and they then all of the resources that they would put into making their character defensive, such as allocating such as putting resists on gear, things like that. Instead of having resists on gear, they will have more damage. Instead of having life on gear, they'll have more damage, or they'll have movement speed or something like that. Everything is based around not getting hit and doing more damage so that you can kill enemies before they kill you. This isn't a particularly wildly popular playstyle. There's only 326 characters that have gone to depth 2500 or deeper. But, as you can probably expect, these players die a lot. A while ago I watched the Twitch stream Crouching Tuna, who's really quite entertaining. And he was one of the people who popularized this ultra deep one hit point delve strategy a few leagues back. Fascinating to watch. And while you're watching him, he's one of the best players in the game, but he would still die roughly once per 2 nodes that he successfully completed. And that was all because he's playing reckless and dangerous in order to do the hardest content the game's got available. Now, with Crouching Tuna dying roughly once every 2 nodes that he's doing, he may be doing... He may be responsible for 20,000 deaths 20,000 character deaths in the delve mines by himself. Which, on the flip side, if you have 2,000 casual players that have died 10 times between Acts 1, 2, and 3 each, he has had the same number of deaths as all of those players put together, but they've all been concentrated into one zone. Whereas with that 2,000 casual players, they've died across all sorts of different zones. And of course, it's not just one person playing that playstyle, it's 326 of them. So for that reason, no surprise at all to see the Azurite Mine is where the most number of players are dying. Eye of the Storm is next. This is the Sirus encounter. Again, gives you a bit of a sense as to just how many times people are fighting Sirus, that there are so many deaths in this zone. Next up, though, is the one that may surprise veteran players. I don't think it should. The Cavern of Anger, Merveil. The reason that Merveil has so many deaths on her is that she's a quite sharp difficulty spike, and she's the first thing in the game that really punishes you if you don't have resistances on your character sorted out. Now, if you're a veteran player, you probably know how to manually dodge everything Merveil does. I'm completely confident in fighting Merveil with 0 cold resistance. And usually I don't even check what my cold resist is before I go in there, because I know the fight well. I know Merveil's capabilities. I know what the cues are, like what her sort of pausing for about facing you and then pausing for about 400 or 500 milliseconds. That means she's about to do her Icicle Barrage. I know if she faces you and quickly does a casting animation, then you've got an Ice Storm over your head. You need to have moved. And so whenever she does one of those animations, I'm already starting to sidestep out of the way. Of course, a new player isn't going to know that. And every new player, unless they really quickly discover that the game is just not for them at all, from the first 10, 20 minutes of playtime, every new player that does start enjoying the game is going to come across Merveil sooner or later. Probably within the first 2 hours of gameplay, maybe even the first one. And then at that point, they're going to be put up against this boss that has unfamiliar attacks, and they've had no real warning coming into it that cold resistance is going to be tested soon. What I think is interesting here is that, like, on Reddit, there's been a lot of discussion of these stats, and players were suggesting that Merveil should be nerfed a bit, reverted to the state that she was in 3.8 incarnation of the game. I disagree. What I think we should be looking at doing is finding better ways to communicate to newer players that they're about to come up on a very dangerous boss that deals huge amounts of cold damage, at least huge for the time, and that if they want to survive that fight, that they're probably going to want to invest in some cold resistance. And then provide some tips in doing so. Maybe even have a quest that gives a rare sapphire ring. Can be an optional quest. It can be, could be added to one of the existing quests, or it could be a new quest that does that. That would be something that would be genuinely beneficial to new players. As veteran players will hardly notice, but for new players, it will help them avoid dying on Merveil. And also for players that have been around a couple of leagues and that aren't that up to date with that fight yet, it may mean that they feel great if they go back to the fight, and then the second time they do it, they're able to beat it deathless because they've had this extra boost of character power. But that Sapphire Ring then won't help them on other content in the game, and so they can learn to change around their gear as well. So yeah, that's something that I would suggest coming out of Cavern of Anger being there. As for the other bosses, we have the Harvest. So this is Act 4 Malachi. Definitely one of the most, definitely the first genuinely mechanically challenging boss in the game, and also it's a boss in a tight arena that has large AoE attacks. The main reason, though, I think with the Harvest that people die to Malachi is that they underestimate some of his abilities and overestimate others. So Malachi has a couple of attacks that are very, very, very visually prominent. The first one being his that sort of cone attack that he does in front of him with a tentacle cone, that everyone can see that and go, okay, maybe you don't get it right the first time, but you can see that attack and go, I know what area is in danger, and I'm going to move out of the way of it next time. He's got his Teleport Slam, which will get you the first time because you don't know what to expect, but then after that you know, okay, that's a huge damage ability. Then he's got the Rune Flare Traps, where he puts something bad on the ground. It stands out like crazy. You go and you step on it, and it doesn't do all that much damage. But on the flip side, he's got the visually very hard to see slug projectiles, where he throws out the slugs. The things that you killed will get your flask charges back. And these things, the actual projectile, if it hits you, really does a massive amount of damage for this part of the game. I think that the reason people are dying to Malachi, at least for veteran players, it's that they have no idea that the slug projectiles are more dangerous than the Rune Flare Traps. And that just comes down to the visual intensity of the skills. I really think that slug projectile should be more visible than it is. The Rotting Core is next. This is interesting in that Act 9 Doedre is, and I think it is Doedre here. I don't think it's the Depraved Trinity. I don't think it's Malagaro. I don't think it's Chevron. I think it is Doedre that's getting all these kills. I'd be interested to know if I'm wrong there. But it's interesting to see that this is here and Act 8 Doedre is not. Now, I personally find Act 8 Doedre to be fine. She is the first boss in the game that deals a meaningful amount of chaos damage. And she also does a fair bit of physical damage as well. But her attacks are pretty easy to dodge if you know what patterns are. So she has a thing where there's the 3 lancing projectiles that fire out at you. That's just a case of sidestep that, even if you have to sidestep into an effluent. And then there's her various other attacks that don't do anywhere near as much damage as that. Act 8 Doedre I think is fine. Act 9 Doedre is mean. Mostly because if you're playing a build that's really powerful during leveling, you can just blitz her down. But if you can't blitz her down, often your skills will kill the pillars, and then you'll have nowhere to hide if she starts doing her screaming tantrum. And she will get off her screaming tantrum in the fight, unless you can kill her really fast. So for that reason, I'm not surprised to see the Rotting Core as the 5th most dangerous area in the game. And I think there's probably a lot of deaths that happen there. Additionally, a lot of players take my philosophy in softcore of just throw enough bodies at it. You know, if you don't have enough gear to do it properly, then just throw enough bodies at it to get it done. And I'll often be running through Act 9, you know, with 2,500 hit points, non-cap resist, and just dodging everything that I can, and then just accepting that every now and again I'm going to make a mistake, and I'm going to have a 5% XP penalty, which I really don't care about because that's about 15 seconds of play at that level. So that is one of the reasons I think that recklessness, because you feel I'm so close to finish the storyline, I'm so close to getting into maps and, you know, start farming my tabula or whatever else I'm wanting to do early in mapping. Rotting Core is one of those spots where, yeah, I definitely do die a lot in that zone, and I'm not surprised to see it up here. Chamber of Innocence, no surprise, tough boss in it. Feeding Trough, no surprise, tough boss in it. Belly of the Beast level 2, so that's Act 4 Piety, who is again one of those bosses where she has a really deadly attack that doesn't look deadly. I'm not talking about the beam. The beam is like you'll stuff that up the first time you fight her because it's not clear what to do. But once you've seen it once, you know what to do. It might catch you off guard by clipping you when the beam first starts, but generally speaking, you will work out what to do in order to dodge it. What's tricky about that Piety fight is the areas of bad shit on the ground that she creates regularly. And additionally, this is the first fight in the game that has a soft DPS race in it. When I'm talking about a DPS race, I mean that the fight is mechanically impossible if you don't have a certain minimal amount of damage. And in this case, it's a soft DPS timer because it's not like you get automatically wiped if you don't kill a boss in a certain period of time. It's that there's a mechanic that causes you to lose more and more control over time that's building up. And that's the adds that she spawns, because she seems to spawn adds without limit. And if you're not killing the adds quickly enough, and ideally you want to be killing them with the same attacks that are hurting Piety herself, then you can really lose control of that arena. Now that will never happen for a veteran player, because even if you're playing somewhat of a meme build, you will have enough damage that doesn't kick in. But I've certainly seen newer players really struggle with that Piety fight because the trash monsters just get out of control in that room. Those players might brute force it with 50 deaths and be responsible for a lot of the deaths in this list. Next up, Upper Scepter of God. This one is, like, a lot of people are attributing it to Dominus specifically. I think it may actually be the trash monsters in that zone, because the Upper Scepter of God is not just the rooftop, but it is also levels 4, 5, and 6 of the tower, and then the 2 trios that you have to fight before Dominus engages you. Those trios do some fairly nasty things if you're not, if you're not ready for them. And whilst veteran players will just mow them down without thinking about it, they can be pretty nasty. And then Dominus has his second form, which has counterintuitive mechanics as to how to deal with the Blood Rain. Lastly, Kauri Fortress is a surprise to me. Uh, Tukahama is a boss that is, like, I would argue is pretty mechanically, maybe not, he's not mechanically trivial, but he's not complex mechanically either. He's certainly a lot easier than some of the other bosses on this list. And he's not numerically particularly hard, unless maybe there's players that go in there with fire resistance that's just like at minus 10% because they'd never thought about it, and they die over and over and over and over to the fire beam in there. Maybe that's the reason that there's a lot of deaths in that zone. I can't imagine that it's from the trash monsters, but what really surprises me is that it is not from Abarath. Abarath is by far the hardest of the Act 6 gods, at least in my opinion, and tests a similar resistance to what Tukahama does. So Tukahama is testing your fire resistance, Abarath also tests fire resistance, but Abarath is, at least in my opinion, mechanically much harder, hits harder, and also has a number of much more surprising skills. So if you know the Abarath fight well, you can predict where his sort of showers of flame, how they will move across the arena, but that requires quite a lot of knowledge of the fight, and I would expect that even most players that have leveled characters through the acts 5 or 6 times don't have that knowledge when they go to the Abarath fight, and so I'm really surprised that people are dying a lot on Tukahama, but not dying anywhere near as much on Abarath. Anyway, that's sort of all my thoughts on these statistics. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, leave it there. I hope you have a good one.